The boat was gone before he had time to understand what had happened. One moment Stephen Callahan was asleep in the cabin of the Napoleon Solo, somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, 1,300 kilometers west of the Canary Islands, in the middle of a night he had no reason to believe was different from any other night at sea. The next moment, and there was no interval between those two moments, no transition, no warning, there was an impact. A sound he later described as an explosion. And water in the cabin immediately, rising with the speed of something that has been waiting. He had seconds, not minutes, seconds. The kind of interval in which a person does not make decisions so much as execute them. The hands finding the emergency kit in the dark, the body moving toward the companionway, the instinct to survive running ahead of the conscious mind that was still trying to process the fact of what was happening. He got out. He inflated the life raft. He dove back into the flooding cabin 3 times for equipment. He watched his boat, the boat he had designed himself, built himself, named after a fictional spy with the particular irony of someone who does not yet know that the name is about to become accurate, disappear into the Atlantic Ocean. He was alone on a rubber raft 1.5 meters in diameter in the middle of the ocean. Nobody knew he was there. What came next was not a rescue story. There was no rescue for 75 of the 76 days that followed. What came next was something else, something that required Stephen Callahan to become, in stages and by necessity, a different kind of person than the one who had gone to sleep in that cabin. This is the Unlost Files. And this is the true story of Stephen Callahan. Stephen Callahan was 29 years old in February of 1982, and he was doing exactly what he had spent years working toward. He was a naval architect, a designer of boats, someone whose professional life was organized around the specific engineering of vessels for the sea. He had designed the Napoleon Solo himself, 6.5 meters of fiberglass and intention, built to cross an ocean. He was crossing one. The voyage had begun in England. The route would take him across the Atlantic alone in a crossing that experienced solo sailors complete regularly, but that is never casual. The Atlantic is not a forgiving body of water, and a solo crossing requires the kind of continuous vigilance that has no off switch. You sleep in short intervals. You check the weather constantly. You manage every system on the boat because there is no one else to manage any of them. Stephen Callahan had done this. He was competent. He was prepared. He had the knowledge that his profession gave him, a structural understanding of boats and the forces they operate in that most sailors do not have. He had equipment. He had a plan. What he did not have, somewhere west of the Canaries on the night of February 5th, was an explanation for what hit the Napoleon Solo. The impact was never definitively identified. The leading theory, supported by the location and the nature of the damage, is a whale strike. Large cetaceans occasionally surface near or beneath vessels at night, particularly in areas where whale populations are dense, and the consequences of a collision between a 6.5-meter boat and an adult whale moving at speed are not survivable for the boat. Whatever it was, it opened the hull. The boat was sinking before he was fully awake. He had retrieved the following from the cabin before the water made further dives impossible. A spear gun, 2 solar stills, inflatable devices that use solar heat to evaporate seawater and collect the distillate as drinkable water, a basic first aid kit, emergency rations sufficient for a few days, a logbook. He had these things, and he had the raft he called Rubber Ducky, with the specific black humor of a man who understood perfectly what he was sitting in, and he had the Atlantic Ocean in every direction with no land in sight and no ships on the horizon. He began to drift. The ocean that Stephen Callahan was adrift on is not, from the perspective of maritime traffic, the same ocean that appears on maps. Maps show the Atlantic as a uniform expanse connecting continents. The reality of maritime traffic is that ships follow routes, corridors of commerce that connect specific ports to specific ports, that are determined by cargo and distance and fuel efficiency. Outside those corridors, the ocean is not empty so much as it is unvisited. A vessel drifting outside the shipping lanes can be invisible to commercial traffic for weeks. Stephen Callahan was outside the shipping lanes. He understood this. The understanding was not abstract, it was the specific, practical knowledge of someone who had studied maritime navigation and who could assess, with the precision that his training gave him, exactly what his position meant in terms of the probability of being found. The probability was not good. He set about the work of staying alive with the systematic approach of an engineer confronting a problem. The problem had three components, and they were all equally urgent, and they were all related to each other in ways that made solving any single one of them dependent on solving the others. Water, food, shelter. The solar stills were his water supply. Each one, functioning correctly in full sun, could produce approximately half a liter of drinkable water per day. Half a liter is not enough. The minimum daily water requirement for a human being under mild conditions is around 2 liters. Stephen was not under mild conditions. He was under equatorial sun on a reflective ocean surface, losing moisture through sweat at a rate that 2 functioning stills would struggle to replace. The stills did not always function correctly. The inflatable chambers that drove the evaporation process were made of thin plastic. The plastic cracked. The seams separated. The solar stills developed leaks with a frequency that became, over the weeks that followed, Stephen's most consuming technical challenge. Not the ocean, not the weather, not the wildlife that circled his raft, but the ongoing, repetitive, never-finished work of keeping the stills sealed enough to produce water. He carried repair materials and he used them constantly, performing microsurgery on equipment that was his only barrier between dehydration and death, in the motion of an open ocean, with hands that were increasingly damaged by salt water exposure. When the rations ran out, he began to fish. The spear gun that Stephen had retrieved from the Napoleon Solo was not designed for the conditions he was using it in. It was designed for underwater hunting. A diver with buoyancy control and visibility, and the ability to approach a target from multiple angles. Stephen was using it from the surface of a moving raft, shooting down at fish that circled beneath him, with the additional constraint that every fish he successfully landed brought sharks to the raft. The sharks were a persistent structural problem. The blood from the fish Stephen caught and cleaned attracted them with a consistency that made their presence a permanent feature of his situation rather than an occasional threat. They circled the rubber ducky. They bumped it with their snouts, the investigatory behavior that sharks exhibit when assessing something unfamiliar. The walls of the raft were rubber, a few millimeters thick. The sharks were larger than the raft. Stephen hit them with the spear gun to drive them away. He hit them repeatedly for 76 days because they returned repeatedly. This is not a metaphor for anything. It is a description of a daily physical task. Hit the sharks with the spear gun before they damaged the raft beyond repair. He ate the fish raw. Everything that could be eaten he ate: the flesh, the organs, the eyes. The fluid in fish eyes is less saline than seawater and more saline than fresh water. It is not a comfortable thing to drink. It contributed to his hydration in a way that nothing else available to him could. He lost weight at a rate that could be measured in visible changes. The process of starvation, when it is gradual, produces changes in the body that a person who is experiencing them cannot fully observe. Stephen tracked his condition in the logbook he had saved from the Napoleon Solo, noting his physical state, his water production, his food intake, the behavior of the fish and the sharks and the weather, the ships he saw on the horizon. He saw 9 of them over 76 days. He fired signal flares. He used a radar reflector. 9 times, a ship appeared on his horizon and continued past it. The ocean is very large. A life raft is very small. These 2 facts are not metaphorical. On the 43rd day, a dorado, a large, fast fish that had been circling the raft, took a strike from the spear gun and fought. It fought in the way that large fish fight when they are hooked and panicking, with the full force of an animal that is not accepting the situation. In the struggle, it opened a tear in the lower flotation tube of the rubber ducky. The raft began to deflate. What followed was 10 days that Stephen Callahan has described as the closest he came to not surviving. Not the thirst, not the hunger, not the sharks, but 10 days of pumping air into a raft that was losing it faster than he could replace it, while simultaneously attempting to construct a repair from the materials available to him. The pump was a foot pump. He operated it continuously. He slept in intervals measured in minutes because any interval longer than that allowed the deflation to reach a point that the raft could not recover from. He was operating the pump with hands that were covered in salt sores, open wounds produced by prolonged exposure to salt water that do not heal in salt water. And the pain of the pump operation on those hands was a specific and constant texture to every hour of those 10 days. He improvised a repair from cord and plastic sheeting. He tested it. It held partially. He reinforced it. It held more. Over several days, working in the motion of the ocean with the tools that happened to be on the raft, Stephen Callahan sealed the tear well enough to stop the immediate crisis. The raft held. He kept pumping. On April 21, 1982, 76 days after the Napoleon Solo went under, Stephen Callahan's raft drifted into the waters near the island of Marigalante in the Caribbean. He had not navigated there. He had drifted there, the current of the Atlantic, the trade winds that move across the ocean in consistent patterns, the specific trajectory of a small object in a large body of water, had carried him from the eastern Atlantic to the Caribbean over 76 days and approximately 3,000 kilometers of open ocean. What brought the fisherman to him was not a signal or a flare. It was birds. A cluster of seabirds had been circling something in the water. The fish that accumulated beneath Stephen's raft had attracted them, and the birds circling in that specific pattern were a signal to fishermen that something below was worth investigating. They found him. The physical condition of Stephen Callahan when the fishermen brought him ashore was documented by the medical personnel who treated him. He had lost approximately a third of his total body weight. His skin was covered in salt sores that had not had the opportunity to begin healing during the voyage because the conditions of the voyage prevented it. He was, in the assessment of the medical team, severely malnourished and dehydrated in ways that would take months to fully reverse. He was conscious. He was coherent. He had his logbook. Stephen Callahan went home. The book he wrote about the 76 days, Adrift, published in 1986, became one of the most widely read survival memoirs ever published, and it remains in print more than 4 decades later. It was not written as a story of triumph exactly, and that is part of why it endures. It was written as a precise, technical, unsentimental account of what those days actually involved. The engineering of survival, the failures and repairs, the sharks and the stills and the fish eyes and the 9 ships that did not stop. He returned to naval architecture. He returned to the sea. He has sailed extensively in the decades since the Napoleon Solo went under, because returning to the sea was the only way to confirm that the 76 days had not taken the sea from him. In interviews over the years, he has been asked the question that follows every story of this kind. It takes different forms, but it is always the same question. What kept you going? His answers have been consistent, and they are not the answers that make good inspirational posters. He describes the practical work of survival, the stills, the pump, the spear gun, as the thing that kept him functional. Not hope, not willpower in the abstract. The work, the specific, daily, concrete problem of keeping the equipment running, because the equipment was what kept him alive, and keeping it running was something he could do, and doing it was the only available alternative to not doing it. He kept the stills working. He kept pumping. He kept hitting the sharks. That is the answer, and it is also the whole story. This has been the Unlost Files. Subscribe if you want more. Leave a comment with what stayed with you. I'll see you in the next one.